Welcome everyone to my Sandrone guide. After much anticipation, the long-awaited Marionette is finally here, and in this guide, I will go over Sandrone's kit and the new Stellar Conduct reaction, then go over her playstyles, artifacts and stats, weapons, team comps, and finally Constellations. Keep in mind that Sandrone is not released yet, and information in this video is still subject to change. And without further ado, Sandrone is a 5-star cryo damage dealer who deals her damage through the new Stellar Conduct reaction. She wields a Claymore, scales on attack, and has a crit rate ascension bonus. Before going over Sandrone's kit, let's first go over the Stellar Conduct reaction. When Sandrone is in your party, the Electro and Cryo Elemental reaction, Superconduct, transforms into Stellar Conduct. Stellar Conduct is very similar to the existing lunar reactions. It is a transformative reaction, meaning that it ignores enemy defense, and you can deal indirect Stellar Conduct damage by applying both Cryo and Electro onto an enemy. Some characters, including Sandrone and some newly buffed Electro and Cryo characters, can deal direct Stellar Conduct damage. The damage formula for direct Stellar Conduct damage is also similar to other direct lunar reaction damage formulas, where direct Stellar Conduct damage ignores defense and scales with crit, attack, elemental mastery, enemy resistance, and even specific reaction and damage bonuses for the Stellar Conduct reaction. Direct Stellar Conduct damage is also not affected by Def Shred and elemental damage bonuses, much like lunar reactions. Triggering the Stellar Conduct reaction will generate a Polestar field. Being in this field will allow your party members to enter the Radiance Stellar Conduct state. The state unlocks parts of Sandrone's and other Stellar Conduct characters, talents, passives, and constellations, and is basically what allows them to deal Stellar Conduct damage or grant buffs to the Stellar Conduct reaction. Enemies in the Polestar field will have their physical resistance reduced, and more importantly, will grant an Electro and Cryo damage bonus to your party members, and increase the Stellar Conduct reaction multiplier through stacks. The stacks can be gained during a 4-second window, in which the number of Cryo and Electro elemental applications is recorded, with each application granting 1 stack. Once this 4-second window is over, the buffs will be granted for the next 4-second window, and again the number of Cryo and Electro applications is recorded for the next 4-second window. The number of stacks in a 4-second window can go up to 12 stacks. With 1 stack, a 28% Electro and Cryo damage bonus is granted to the whole party, with each further stack increasing the damage bonus by 1%. As for the Stellar Conduct reaction multiplier, with no stacks it stays at 1, and with 1 stack it goes up to 1.45, with each stack increasing the multiplier by around 5%. As an example, this team with all Electro and Cryo characters can contribute to the Stellar Conduct buff. And for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that each character takes 2 seconds on field to cast their skill, which allows them to deal off-field damage, generating stacks even from off-field. When the Stellar Conduct reaction is first triggered, the 4-second window starts, and it starts counting the number of Cryo and Electro applications. Let's take Escoffier's Cryo application for an example. By casting her skill, Escoffier can deal off-field Cryo damage for 20 seconds, with damage being dealt at 1-second intervals. However, this does not mean 4 stacks during the 4-second window, as almost all characters have to deal with an internal cooldown of their different talents. Escoffier's elemental skill can apply Cryo every 1.5 seconds, meaning that after the first hit, 1 second passes and the second hit triggers. However, the 1.5 second timer is not over yet, and therefore the second hit of her elemental skill does not apply Cryo. So that means that in the 4-second window, Escoffier can generate 2 stacks. Both Yae Miko and Qiqi in this team can also generate around 2 stacks every 4 seconds. So in this 4-second window, we were able to generate 5 stacks. In the next 4-second window, Sandrone takes the field and the whole party receives a 33% electro and cryo damage bonus, which can buff Escoffier's off-field damage and even parts of Yae Miko's off-field damage, and a 1.7 stellar conduct reaction multiplier, which greatly increases stellar conduct damage. In the current 4-second window, the 2 stacks from each party member in addition to the 3 that Sandrone will be able to generate equals 9 stacks for the next 4-second window, and the loop repeats. I should also mention that if, for example, you burst on Yae Miko when she's on field, you would actually gain an extra stack, as elemental bursts and skills share different cooldowns. However, that stack will apply to the next window only, and not to mention that bursts can take additional on-field time. And with that out of the way, the rest of Sandrone's kit is pretty simple. The bread and butter of her kit is her charged attack, which contributes to the majority of her stellar conduct damage. Using her charged attack, Fagio is summoned and deals continuous AoE cryo damage and periodically higher damage condensed beams. If you're in the Polestar field and therefore in the Radiance stellar conduct state, the condensed beams will deal direct stellar conduct damage instead. Instead of consuming stamina, using Sandrone's charged attack and summoning Fagio will build up decoding power. Once decoding power reaches the maximum, Fagio will enter power overdrive mode, in which condensed beams will no longer fire, and damage dealt will decrease. As you use Sandrone's charged attack, you fire off 3 condensed beams before decoding power reaches the maximum level. After that, decoding power will gradually decrease. Sandrone's elemental skill gets around this issue. Pressing Sandrone's elemental skill will reset Fagio's decoding power, and by using Sandrone's elemental skill, she can also hover for a 6-second duration. If an enemy is nearby, pressing Sandrone's skill will launch 2 prism shots, with the second shot dealing stellar conduct damage if you're within the Polestar field. This sets up a rather simple rotation in which you use Sandrone's charged attack to launch 3 condensed beams and deal stellar conduct damage. Once decoding power is at its maximum, you can press Sandrone's elemental skill to reset decoding power and deal damage, and immediately go back to Sandrone's charged attack for a 4-second duration, while Sandrone's skill is on cooldown, and then repeat. Sandrone's burst can be used to wrap up your rotation, in which it deals some initial damage, and a large instance of damage at the end. The larger instance of damage becomes stellar conduct damage if you're again within the Polestar field. Much like with Nod Cry characters, Sandrone has a passive that converts superconduct into stellar conduct, and it also increases the reaction's base damage bonus based on her attack for up to a 14% base stellar conduct damage bonus, which requires 2000 attack. Sandrone's first ascension passive reinforces the basic gameplay loop of using her charged attack and building decoding power, and then resetting it by using her skill. This passive increases the stellar conduct damage dealt by Sandrone's elemental skill if Fagio's decoding power is above 50 points, which is half the bar. It also encourages using her burst at the end. 1 stack is gained for every 10 points of decoding power. Fagio loses, stacking up to 10 times, with the stacks increasing the stellar conduct damage dealt by Sandrone's burst. To gain the maximum number of stacks, you only need to reset Fagio's decoding power once, but you usually save Sandrone's burst for the end of her rotation. And finally, Sandrone's second passive increases her elemental mastery by 8 for every 100 attack, granting up to 160 elemental mastery. To gain the maximum effect, Sandrone needs 2000 attack. Moving on to her playstyles, Sandrone is usually going to be played in teams with cryo and electro characters to trigger the stellar conduct reaction, and deal off-field cryo and electro damage to build stacks and grant buffs. A cryo party member also unlocks the cryo resonance, which grants 15% crit rate against enemies affected by cryo, and also helps generate energy particles for Sandrone. There are some characters who, alongside Sandrone, are receiving buffs that allow them to use the stellar conduct reaction. Some of these characters will likely be paired with Sandrone, but Sandrone's teams do not require stellar conduct characters. A cryo character like Escoffier can still build stacks and provide her resistance shred buff, while also dealing damage on her own and benefiting from the cryo damage bonus granted by the stellar conduct reaction. Some characters of other elements, like Nicole or even Sucrose, who provide useful buffs such as attack and elemental mastery, can be used with Sandrone, even if they don't provide stacks. Being an Anemo character, Sucrose can actually provide stacks by infusing her attacks with cryo. Yae Miko is one of the characters receiving stellar conduct buffs, and in her case, the buffs allow her elemental skill and burst to deal stellar conduct damage on top of her electro damage, allowing her to benefit from the types of buffs provided by the stellar conduct reaction. In stellar conduct teams with Sandrone, Yae Miko can contribute to a decent amount of the team's damage. Qiqi also becomes a lot more relevant with stellar conduct, as having her elemental skill activated grants a 50% stellar conduct reaction bonus, and her burst can also deal stellar conduct damage. I will of course be going more over teams and rotations later on in the team section. Sandrone, in her current state, and with the characters available, can deal decent damage. However, it is admittedly not on the scale of some of the Nod Cry and Lunar reaction damage dealers. And it also looks like Sandrone is currently waiting for an upcoming cryo or electro sub DPS, one that can help reach the full 12 stacks of the stellar conduct buff. As an example, the current best electro character to use with her, Yae Miko, does have some drawbacks, as her electro application is somewhat standard and she doesn't particularly grant any buffs, at least not until her C1. Overall, Sandrone looks somewhat interesting and simple to play, as Sandrone is introducing a new reaction, one that will probably become more relevant in future patches. She is likely also going to get stronger with the introduction of more stellar conduct characters. But as always, I would recommend pulling for characters you like. Before going over Sandrone's build, her talent priority is to first level up her normal attacks, as her charged attack is the main source of her damage, then level up her elemental burst and elemental skill. All of Sandrone's talents contribute to her damage and should ideally be leveled. As for artifacts, Sandrone's main and best option is going to be the Disenchantment in Deep Shadow set. This set is made for stellar conduct characters. The 2-piece set effect increases attack, and the 4-piece bonus increases stellar conduct damage by 40% and grants 16% crit rate against enemies affected by stellar conduct. This is Sandrone's best in slot, and by a decent margin. However, you could also use other artifact sets, such as Gilded Dreams, which increases both attack and elemental mastery, or even the Hexerai set, solely for how much attack it gives, even to non-Hexerai characters. Attack is a useful stat for Sandrone, not only for increasing stellar conduct damage, but it also increases her stellar conduct base damage bonus through her passive talent, and even increases her elemental mastery through her second passive. You could also run 2-piece mixes with attack and elemental mastery. Thundering Fury also now increases stellar conduct damage by 20%. However, the other effects such as the elemental skill cooldown decrease are not useful, as Sandrone's skill already has a short cooldown, and the usage of her skill is dictated more so by the duration of her charged attack. Moving on to stats, let's first go over energy recharge. Sandrone's burst deals a decent portion of her damage, and therefore, you would want to have enough energy recharge to burst every rotation. However, Sandrone's burst has an energy cost of 60, and she is usually going to be paired with at least one other cryo unit, who can also help generate some energy, which leaves Sandrone with smaller amounts of energy recharge required. In teams with one other cryo party member and a Favonius weapon in the party, she would need around 120 energy recharge. In triple cryo teams, she can get by with little to no energy recharge investment. Moving on to main stats, Stellar Conduct damage scales with attack, elemental mastery, and crit, and these are the stats that you should prioritize. As with lunar reactions, elemental damage bonuses do not affect Stellar Conduct damage. Attack can be a slightly higher priority, as it also increases the Stellar Conduct base damage bonus and also gets converted into elemental mastery. Both effects require 2000 attack to reach the maximum. In a team without an attack buffer, going for an attack Sands and Goblet and a crit rate / damage circlet is usually going to be the best option. Going for either an elemental mastery Sands or Goblet can also be viable if it has better substats. With a weapon that provides a lot of attack such as Wolf's Gravestone, or if you're running an attack buffer such as Nicole, going for 2 attack main stats, or 1 attack and 1 EM, is about the same damage, and you should pick whichever combination has the better substats. In regards to crit rate, do keep in mind that if you're running the Disenchantment in Deep Shadow set, Sandrone gains an additional 16% crit rate, and the Cryo Resonance also increases crit rate by 15%, although it can sometimes be inconsistent. So Sandrone can start with 31% crit rate on top of her crit rate ascension passive. So in most cases, you should target around 69% crit rate. As for substats, Sandrone wants crit rate and crit damage, attack, and elemental mastery. Moving on to weapons, Sandrone's signature, a teaspoon of Transcendence, is going to be her best in slot. This weapon increases crit damage by 44% and attack by 28%. Upon hitting an enemy with a charged attack, Stellar Conduct damage will be increased by 16% for 5 seconds, stacking up to 3 times for a 48% bonus. While this is Sandrone's best in slot, it is also not completely necessary to get, as other 5 stars, including standard banner options such as Wolf's Gravestone, also perform decently. 1000 Blazing Suns grants Sandrone crit rate, crit damage, and attack, with its effect stacking with Sandrone's charged attacks. Wolf's Gravestone grants a whole bunch of attack, and even grants a smaller attack buff to your party members. In terms of 4-star options, Sandrone has multiple decent options to use, with some of the better ones being obtainable for free. Mailed Flower is an event-exclusive Claymore that increases attack and elemental mastery after triggering an elemental reaction. Tidal Shadow is the Fontaine craftable Claymore, and grants an attack buff after being healed, which requires you to have a healer in your party, such as Escoffier or Qiqi. Both options are great, and you could use either one. Lithic Blade is also usable if you have a character from Leeway in your party, and becomes better if you have 2 Leeway characters in your party, such as Beidou and Qiqi. Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword is also another decent option to use. The energy recharge substat might not always be useful, but it also grants a lot of attack. You might also notice that a lot of these 4-star weapons, including both Battle Pass weapons, do not have a specific refinement. This is because some of the effects provided, such as regular damage bonuses, do not scale with Stellar Conduct damage, making the effects gained negligible. Overall, Sandrone has pretty decent weapon options, including multiple 5 stars and 4 stars that can be obtained for free. Moving on to team comps, Sandrone is a Stellar Conduct damage dealer who would usually be paired with Electro and Cryo sub DPSs to trigger the Stellar Conduct reaction, build stacks, and even deal damage of their own. One Electro unit is a requirement to trigger the Superconduct reaction, and having another Cryo unit is also necessary as it allows you to build stacks before Sandrone takes the field, and also unlocks the Cryo Resonance and helps generate energy. The last slot of Sandrone's teams can be another Cryo or Electro character, or you can even trade Stellar Conduct stacks for other non-Cryo or Electro supports. For your Electro sub DPS, Yae Miko is currently the best option for this slot. Yae Miko is one of the characters that are receiving Stellar Conduct buffs, allowing her to deal Stellar Conduct damage, and her off-field Electro application is also less conditional than other electro options. With Sandrone, Yae Miko can contribute to a portion of the team's damage, and in such teams, she can equip the Disenchantment in Deep Shadow to increase her stellar conduct damage. With Yae Miko's C1, she also grants a 50% electro damage and stellar conduct damage bonus to the whole party after she either triggers super conduct or stellar conduct or deals stellar conduct damage, making her an even better option. If you don't have Yae Miko, other options such as Beidou are viable. Beidou is also receiving buffs, very notably with her C6 reducing cryo resistance by 15%, and also increasing the active character's elemental mastery by 200 while her elemental burst is active. Fischl can also be used. However, she does not deal or buff stellar conduct damage, and her electro application is not that great with Sandrone. Although I do want to note that she does become a lot better with her Hexrai passive, which requires you to use a Hexrai character like Nicole as your last slot. For your second cryo character, there are multiple options, including Escoffier and the 2 cryo units who are receiving stellar conduct buffs, Qiqi and Diona. Escoffier deals a decent amount of off-field cryo damage, heals, and can reliably build stellar conduct stacks. Escoffier also reduces cryo and hydro resistance by 10% with 2 cryo characters in your party, and 15% with 3 cryo characters. Qiqi can deal stellar conduct damage through her burst, and while her skill is active, she grants a 50% stellar conduct reaction bonus. Her skill can also deal damage from off-field and generate stacks. If you're using Qiqi's burst to deal stellar conduct damage, her C2 increases her attack by 50%, making her more into a stellar conduct sub-DPS than just a support. Diona can also be pretty decent, especially with her C6. Diona's burst can deal off-field damage and heal for a 12-second duration, but the stack generation is somewhat lower than Qiqi or Escoffier. Diona's C6 will increase the elemental mastery of the active character inside the field of Diona's burst by 200 if their HP is above 50%, and the active character will also deal 50% increased stellar conduct reaction damage. The duration of these buffs is also effectively slightly longer than the 12-second duration of Diona's burst. Escoffier, Qiqi, and Diona are going to be the main options to use for this role. Escoffier and Qiqi are probably going to be just slightly better, with Escoffier likely being the best option overall, although a C2 Qiqi can probably come closer. Diona should also be a competitive and viable option to use as well. Diona and the team can use the Noblesse set, whereas Escoffier or Qiqi can use the Tenacity of the Millilith set to provide an attack buff. For your last slot, you can run another cryo or electro unit. In such a team, Sandrone is going to deal the majority of the team's damage, followed by Yae Miko and Escoffier. Qiqi and this team can use the Tenacity of the Millilith set, while Escoffier uses her standard options such as Golden Troop to maximize her damage. With Qiqi and Escoffier, you can also choose not to burst, to save a bit of on-field time if you do not need the healing. As previously mentioned, bursting here can apply an additional instance of cryo, which will grant an additional stack, but only to a portion of Sandrone's on-field time, which makes the additional damage not worth the extra time spent on field. The same also goes with Yae Miko unless you have her C1, in which you definitely want to burst to gain the damage buff. The same can also apply with a C2 Qiqi. Other options for this last slot include Nicole, who can provide a party-wide attack buff, which greatly increases both Sandrone's and Yae Miko's damage. Nicole also does not need to burst here, as the arcane projections do not apply the element of the active character. Nicole as your last slot will probably be the highest damage team comp currently available with all units at C0. Xilonen can also work here, as she can reduce enemies' resistance to your party's elements, increasing the whole team's damage. The scroll buff can also be useful if you have Escoffier, granting her cryo damage bonus and increasing the damage Escoffier deals. Sucrose can be a very decent option to use, especially as a 4-star option. Sucrose buffs Elemental Mastery, which increases stellar conduct damage, and can even add additional stacks through infusing her burst with Cryo. Since Sucrose is also an Anemo character, she can use the Viridescent Venerer set and reduce Cryo resistance, making her overall a very decent last slot. You can also use Bennett as a last slot here, having him go right before Sandrone to maximize the on-field time of Bennett's attack buff. Ian-san can also be used here to provide her attack buff, while also granting extra stacks for a portion of Sandrone's damage. You could also use Cyno or Risley alongside Sandrone, where Cyno or Risley would be used on field to deal damage and build stacks, and then switch to Sandrone, essentially playing 2 damage dealers. While such teams are definitely possible, these teams are probably not going to be some of Sandrone's better teams, but should definitely be viable if you want to use Cyno or Risley. A Columbina and an Escoffier could also and will probably be viable to run with Sandrone. Inefa in this team can deal a lot of damage while also generating stellar conduct stacks. Let's also tap on rotations. Sandrone's basic gameplay loop would be to use her charged attack to fire off 3 condensed beams and deal stellar conduct damage. As Fagio's decoding power reaches its maximum, we use her skill to reset it and use her charged attack again during a 4-second window as her skill is available to use again, and by then, Fagio's decoding power would have reached its maximum. You can keep this loop going for as long as you need, but in most cases, Sandrone's on-field time would mostly be dictated by other party members' skill, burst, or buff duration. In most teams, Sandrone can take up to 15 seconds on field, in which she uses her charged attack 3 times, and ends it with her burst. With a team with Qiqi, Yae Miko, and Escoffier, we can start with either Escoffier or Yae Miko, the characters who have the longest skill duration, then switch to Qiqi and use her skill, which grants the 50% stellar conduct bonus for 15 seconds. And then we switch to Sandrone, use her charged attack, skill, charged attack, skill again, and finally charged attack and burst. Moving on to the final segment of this guide, Sandrone's Constellations. Sandrone's Constellations somewhat break the usual pattern of having a strong C1, followed by an even stronger C2. With Sandrone, her middle constellations alongside her C6 are the ones providing a notable difference in damage. Sandrone's first constellation reduces Fagio's decoding power buildup by 50%, allowing Fagio to fire off more condensed beams before having to use Sandrone's skill. This can change up Sandrone's own combo, although the more noticeable difference comes from the party-wide 30% increased stellar conduct damage. Overall, while this constellation does increase damage, I would not really recommend pulling for C1. If you're looking for vertical investment, Sandrone's signature weapon might be a better option, especially if you're using a 4-star weapon. C2 increases the condensed beam's crit damage by 40%, and each time a condensed beam is fired, its crit damage is increased by 20%. This can stack up to 3 times, bringing a total of 100% additional crit damage to your condensed beams. C3 increases normal attack level by 3, which is a pretty noticeable increase to your damage, as the majority of Sandrone's stellar conduct damage comes from her charged attacks. Sandrone's 4th constellation deals an extra instance of stellar conduct damage, scaling at 125% of her attack, once every 4 seconds when dealing stellar conduct damage. C5 increases elemental burst level by 3. And lastly, Sandrone's 6th constellation fires off an additional instance of either cryo or stellar conduct damage if you're within a polestar field, with the stellar conduct damage dealing a total of 320% of attack when the 3rd condensed beam during an instance of Sandrone's charged attack hits an opponent. Additionally, increases all stellar conduct damage Sandrone deals by 20%. This is an elevation multiplier, meaning that it's not just a 20% reaction bonus, but instead gets multiplied on top of her damage, much like Crit does. Overall, Sandrone's Constellations, while still increasing damage, especially her later ones, are not really that impactful, certainly compared to some of the damage dealers and supports released in Nodcry, which is also great as you don't need to get any of them. It's also more likely that future characters might work well with Sandrone, and it might just be better to save pulls for future characters. And that's all for this guide. Sandrone does look pretty interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to the Marionette finally being playable after being revealed long ago. Thank you for making it till the end, and thank you for watching.